We're here to talk joinery, clearly. My name is Matt Giossi. This is
Ron. I'm Ron Kuhn. We are Giossi and Kuhn.
Yep. We're a small furniture design shop right down the street from here, literally at 2 blocks. And we've been building under, well, we started with a traditional apprenticeship under Hank Gilpin, who's a master craftsman and designer out of Lincoln. And we both did, 10 years for you, 13 years for me working under Hank. And we built, I don't know, maybe 500 pieces for him over the last 13 years. And then we've slowly branched off and started doing our own design and build work. And that was about 6 years ago. So we wanted to come tonight to just talk about our process in functional joinery and how it drives our designs and how we work with it. And I mean, we brought in this piece in particular to start the conversation because it's heavily influenced by joinery. We wanted to show the client and show the people seeing it. Basically, what we could do is a little bit of a flex. We were like, all right, let's show off here. And we made it in Western yew wood. And yeah, let's just start this up here. We started with a center post design that has double tenons coming into it. So there's 3 points. We have 2 double tenons coming in here, and then we moved into vertical lap joints with a through tenon and wedge twice. If you guys want to get up and get right over this and look at it, you're totally free. Feel free to. And we also have our test part for it.
Also, as a test, that's beat to hell, but you can pass it around and see the double tenons that go into the shape shoulder.
And you can also see that one of the tenons is a little shorter than the other. And that is actually because we didn't want to lose too much strength in the center post. So we can keep the length in one tenon versus the other one. So you can have a long tenon coming in, a slightly shorter one. The next one, that long tenon comes through, same thing. So it kind of overlaps itself.
A lot of what we do is try to, we try to make the joint the detail. You see, it's not only practical, but it can be decorative. And it's crafty. A lot of times it spells it out for any type of client, whether you do woodworking or you don't. Once they kind of see what's going on there, they think this must have taken some accuracy. And sometimes that makes it easier to say, here's the bill. Here's what you're getting. It's strong. It looks pretty. And frankly, at this day and age, it's unique. It's not a lot of furniture that showcases the traditional methods anymore.
Is there any trick to making the mortise in that cylinder?
Yeah, so I actually cut the mortise in the cylinder while it was all square. So you map it all out. This one in particular, we actually did leave with square shoulders. It was a aesthetic choice. But yeah, you start out with your square piece, you map it all out, you lay out your circle. You have to be really, really accurate, and it takes a little bit of head knocking, but you lay it out, you mortise it. And then what I did is that was actually a cutoff from the real piece, this one. So I left it, I had the piece that was about this long, had the mortises on all sides, and then ripped the entire shape out on the table saw, and then shaped it all with hand planes and scrapers.
Yeah, you made this before we started turning. So that it looks like it was done on a lathe, but it wasn't. Which is, and then frankly, you kind of, unless you packed all the joints, it'd be tedious. It was faster just to set up a series of angle cuts on the table saw once the piece was mortised to remove a lot of the waste. And then I assume you went in with a number 3 or something, some kind of plane stuff.
Yeah, it's a number 3, and it's a little bit of a finicky shape. You have to make sure it's perfect. So it's just a lot of cross-checking yourself, sanding, cross-checking, and a lot of scraper work. But once you get it, you basically just fit. When you cut that tenon, you fit your next shoulder to it. So even if it's a little off, you can kind of get in there and you can kind of, back cut the joint, throw a little bit of sandpaper under there, kind of loosen it up, and then you drop it and you slowly work it until it's perfectly the shape. So essentially you're scribing your shoulder right to the round rather than trying to nail it. It's really hard to nail curved joints. It's like, I don't think there's ever been a time where I've just taken, a chisel to a curved joint, cleaned it up and then put together and been like, that looks great. It always
It's tedious.
Yeah.
Tedious.
And it's always a little different, you know, if you're turning, maybe you would be a little bit faster and a little more accurate, but even still, you're gonna end up with
So
that.
the round
inaccuracy.
cylinder was not turned, it was just
Shaped by hand, yeah.
shaped by.
Yep, yeah.
So you just
Yeah.
keep removing the facets.
You
creating
just,
more facets,
exactly,
more facets.
until it's like really close and then it's just all scraper and sanding. And it's just a lot of careful work. You know, you draw your line, you shape right to your line. If you have a perfect round on there, you shape, so you're splitting that line right in half. And
We-
it's,
Yeah, just actually started turning like not even a year ago.
and so we're loving it.
Yeah, we're
It's a bit fun.
And
It
if
speeds up our
anyone
life.
here is a serious turner, just don't look too closely at this. Because they're still sussing it out, but a lot of how we were taught how to shape is all with rasps, files, spoke shapes, hand planes. One thing about the tool for the job, especially when you're trying to get a perfect circle on a long piece.
Yeah, this is another example of shaping a circle by hand. This is, we did this cylinder husk tenon same way. It was, you know, finesse, you know, you cut all your joint square, and then you just do bandsaw cuts to get it pretty close with a fence. And then you go on with files, rasps, and scrapers and chisels. And you end up with this, and it's the same thing. It's finessing, fitting. If you actually looked at this thing, you'd be like, oh, it's not exactly round, but no one's gonna ever look at that,
Right.
really, you know.
But since we're on the topic of scribing shoulders,
Yeah, we could just lean into that.
talk about the
This
V
is a
joint.
very good one.
Again, more to square and then shaped, and then the V is laid out again with pencil, a really careful saw cut.
Yeah, I do usually use a razor. You map it all out in a grid system. You take a little razor, you scribe your shoulder, so it's exactly the same on all of them. And then bandsaw cut with a little chisel pairing until it's perfect.
How do you feel? Do you want me to pass this around, or do you guys just come up after? Yeah. Just be
This is
careful,
just
because
a good-
it's a real piece. We're gonna have to charge money for that.
This is a really good example of taking a very traditional style of table. It's a trestle table. It's, you know, the Shakers made how many trestle tables? Trestle tables have been around forever. They're very easy, practical, and this is where the you know, decorative joinery comes into play. Like, why not do something that has some interest? You know, play with it. It gets a little bit different.
Sorry.
What the you know, something traditional, just do it, you know, maybe no one will ever notice that joint. But the one person that does, or the client that does, or when you send it out of the shop and you feel really good about it, you'll know that there's a detail in that somebody maybe one day will sneak a peek at and be kind of like, oh my God, and you can feel good about it. And it also opens up with a V joint, you open up your ability to shape. You know, if you wanted to do that trestle foot and crown the whole side of it and make it roll really soft all the way through, you can do that, because at that point you have a miter, you know, essentially. And it's opens up a lot of opportunity. And it is like, you can break that edge and make it a detail, create a shadow. You can step it back, you know, step the vertical back a little bit and leave a weight in the foot, and that can be a detail. It just opens up. This is how we think about design and how we think about building, is the joinery and the species drive the design 100%. Like, we come up with the concept with sketches until the client's like, all right, cool, that looks roughly good, like what I'm thinking, go for it. And then that's when we go, all right, well, what do you want to do for a joint here? What do you want to do for a joint here? And it grows into the actual design. But I will say that all of our joinery is practical. We don't do it just for whatever. Like, we never do something where like, just throw a tendon here for no reason. If it's functional, it's there. You know, if it's actually holding something and you want to grow a leg or grow a stretcher and you need it to be stronger, it's, you know, instead of doing a house tenon, it's stronger to have a through tenon that's wedged. So, you know, you get things like these small pin tendons that are wedged all over pieces, and we don't like to throw it in everybody's face because it's a little too much sometimes. You see a lot of that like arts and crafts work that they have, you know, like, you guys know Green and Green at all?
Yeah.
So Green and Green, they were wonderful.
real fast, I think there was a question in the back. I don't want to pass you. Did you have a question?
Yeah, so it's about this joint.
Yep.
When I look at this joint, it kind of reminds me very much of the sliding dovetails that you see at the bottom of the pie crust table. So
Totally.
is that not strong enough, or do you just want to do your own?
We wanted to do our own thing, and also I was actually, one big thing is I wanted to be able to lift this table up and not see a joint there, which you can fill a sliding dovetail, but there's something about it that's always kind of like, we can make a detail out of that, but it's also,
This,
you know.
this glass is also kind of lived with at this point, but the center post, given the stock that we had for the U, is laminated, and the end grain really plays off of one another. It's a really beautiful spiral, and to keep that intact.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, a sliding dovetail like would have been way faster.
Way
probably more
faster.
lucrative, But we're crazy. So
We've been trained by somebody who loves to overcomplicate pieces.
Yeah.
Just for his own, enjoyment of building, which is why we do this. We don't do this. We weren't like, oh man, we're gonna be making millions of dollars doing this. We were like, I want to live my life every day doing something that's challenging and feels accomplishing at the end of the day. And so we went with this, and we learned from a guy who, he's like, anyone gonna notice that? And we're like, probably not. And he's like, but it's for us, right? And we're like, yeah, it is. It's for us. And this is why we're doing this. It is our everyday action.
the flip side is like our inability to let things go.
Yeah.
That'll be our next. We get to talk about that next. Frankly, we're kind of jaded. We were fortunate to come up and have the apprenticeship that we did with a guy who had this clientele, and every piece was different. And it's like, we don't want to fall into the trap of doing the same joint every time. Like, it's just interesting to see, can we do it that way?
Yeah.
Why not? Let's try it. And it's kind of fresh. So we're starting in our own business now. We're starting to kind of flirt with the idea of getting a small batch production line going. And we're making some prototypes, and it's great. It's lucrative. Everything's jigged up and it moves faster, but at the same time, it's like it's shaping this part 14 times, and work doesn't feel as fun as it did when we were doing it.
Mind numbing.
It gets mind numbing,
Yeah,
and
it feels like you're part of a production line.
yeah.
And it's not exactly why we got into this. We got into this to challenge ourselves. It was like, all right, if we make two of the same piece, both of us are like, oh man, this sucks. Like, why are we doing this? Like, why are we not making a different thing? Or why aren't we doing this slightly different? And that's where it comes into, like, the production stuff is tough to stomach sometimes, but it is, if you can do it right. Exactly. It's like it's the burger on the menu.
Yeah.
It's like guaranteed somebody's gonna buy it.
Where's your shop?
It's right actually down.
Oh, you did
Elmwood,
say that.
Yeah.
This way, actually, right?
Oh, yeah,
It's right here.
back over here.
So just cross park, and if you take your first left, it's half the way, and then the build, you go down, it's down behind 4 or 5 houses.
Yeah, it's right against the train tracks.
Yeah.
Right off Bissell. Bissell, Hathaway, and Spooner all connect us right to the building. So
Big building, tons of artists, tons of leaks, tons of
a lot of leaks.
then you got us.
We're moving around them right now. Yeah, we're in the back
Sounds
corner.
That-
But yeah, we're-
That the old.
Yes.
plant?
Yep.
It is, yeah. Yeah, we're actually talking about possibly doing next time.
Yeah.
We have a little more lead time. We'll do a little more of a formal talk about species and how we're working with it. And we will bring you guys to our shop. We'll just open it up, say whoever wants to come, go for it. And we'll have pieces there. All of our machines will be there and our wood, and then we'll talk about, species driven design and stuff.
Yeah, could even do a shaping demo or something.
Yeah,
Talk more about
that'd be great.
shaping.
But yeah, so to not lead too far away from this,
So yeah, so our point is to draw focus to the joinery and have that really be one of the driving design components. And then from there, this is pretty informal. We're open to questions. We're hoping that you all might get up and grab a piece and say, what's going on here? How did you do this? Or why did you do this? Otherwise, we can take it.
So this table is glued up, or does it come apart?
no, it's glued up.
Yeah.
Yep, everything's glued up. Like the test pieces, we always do one test piece at least for every part of the table. For reasons like this, for reference, there's a lot of times where we'll be sitting there and we'll be doing a drawing and you'll look up at the test ball and you're like, oh man, I could actually play with that leg. and I could play with this, and it inspires you, you know, and so, and it also maps out, how did I do this last time? Because there's times like we built so many pieces that there's times where I'm like, you know, I'll see a piece that comes out of the test wall that I'm like, did I make this? I don't even remember making.
Which
this.
glue do you use?
Was that
Which glue do you use?
Type 3? Yeah, 90% of the time it's Type 3.
Yeah, red and green.
Red and green are our go-to. Yeah. It's great. It's totally when you do joinery that's tight enough, you really only need a little touch of glue and it should hold up forever.
We have used epoxy in instances where we had a really large tile top. It was a bunch of,
Oh yeah.
really 4-inch, 3/8 tile,
5/16.
5/16 styles.
5/16.
And there was a lot. I mean, there had to be over 100, and they went down in a specific sequence, so they kind of looked woven. And we needed we needed a long open time on the glue so we can get everything set. And then we had like big sheets of ply that would clamp down over a section, keep it in place. But
Yeah, we really don't steer too far away from like we'll do epoxy, but
So what do the numbers mean on the side of that? Is that how you laid it out?
this is probably, if there's numbers on it. Yeah, this is probably, yeah, so these are my runs. So it's like, I started at this and there's 0 and 1. So when I was drawing everything, I made sure it was exactly the same distance down, exactly the same distance over, same thing, you know. It's a lot of that finessey, like, all right, be patient, it's gonna be perfect if you do it. That's like kind of one of those things with what we do that I really like is, I mean, I love the joinery aspect of it. But I love taking the time to really map everything out and think it through. And then just nail it. Like if we can, it's like the best feeling in woodworking. It's like, you know, if you sometimes it's accidental, sometimes it's totally, you know, it worked out perfect and you're like, all right, I totally planned that. That was good. But that's like a really good example of that. Like there's not often times that we do that. The piece that this actually comes from right here it was a headboard where this piece was actually, you know, about that long. This is just my test part to make sure I knew what I was doing joinery wise and shaping. And this thing had big arches like that. And that was another moment where I had to map out, you know, 4 feet of 1/2-inch lines and make sure it's perfect because we had mortise and tenons kind of coming in here and this big floating panel. And that is, that's my dog alarm. But you know, that's basically what that's for. And it doesn't happen often, but if we need to like nail a shape, we'll draw it. And then the only way to map it out from a drawing to a real piece oftentimes is grid systems.
it looks really cheap. Sometimes it's faster than a template.
You talk about how you
Carved it?
cut this
Yeah.
guy.
Yeah, so basically, what I do a lot of the time when we cut shoulders on tenons, let's say our tenon is 1.25 inches or something. So I'll usually cut them, cut them vertically to fit the mortise. Then I'll nip off the excess on the bandsaw and then come over to a table saw. And if the fence is here, I just run it right against the fence, and that's your closest reference. So basically what I did here is I mapped out the same shape of the circle that's right here. And I did as close of an angle cut as I could because I want to try to speed up that process as fast as possible. So I'm not like wasting a lot of time. So that is essentially what's happening. So I back cut that so it's on the hard angle, and then I go in with chisels and just.
So that final contour shape.
That final contour shape is with
Yeah.
chisels. And there's a really good, I wish I had the other part to this because this is a really good example of it. When you have these curved shoulders, you can actually use sandpaper between your joint as you're fitting it and closing it. It's kind of like if you were fitting dovetails on the run, if you're getting close to that final press and you want it to be a perfect line on all your tails, you get them close and you come in with chisels and you knock it down slowly, chisel back, knock it down slowly, chisel back. So you actually have a tapered dovetail coming in and you're slowly pairing it. So you're scribing it to your pin. It's essentially the same idea with sandpaper, where you have this press in here and it's really close. Let's say it's a 30-second away from the shoulder. You take 120 and you just kind of run it in between the shoulder vertically all the way around, and you press it a little closer, 180, and then you just keep pinching sandpaper until finally when you push it together, it's like it looks seamless.
Does everybody follow that?
Yeah, it's a
Like
hard
where
thing
where the sandpaper is. because I figured we brought a prop for sandpaper.
Yeah,
And essentially when the joint's in, or when you're trying to fit the shoulder all the way, the paper goes right against the part.
so we are not gonna be able to actually show it because the
Yeah.
shoulders are still here. But you kind of slip it in here and you only put the paper so it's on the, on the scribe side of the shoulder. You have it clamped up and you just kind of, you hug the joint like that and then push it closer. And oftentimes what I'll do is I will actually push it closer with the sandpaper in there and push it a little harder, sandpaper in there. And then eventually when you go to close the whole thing up, if
Fractions of a millimeter.
exactly. And it happens
Nicely get.
fairly fast. Like, yeah, exactly. It's like, it's a patience game, but if you think about it, you can get a whole table of joints fit. This thing probably took me, that joint probably took me each of them maybe 10, 15 minutes to fit once I got going on my system.
Once you get comfortable, you know how much weight you can take quickly.
Yeah.
Get that out of the way. And then there's like the finesse, the end part is for all the time really at that point. I should
Probe actually.
like
Like the edges meet.
folded and just really tight to the part that you're scribing to and just really crisp. And like
Yeah.
I wouldn't grab something on my trot that was kind of beef. Like I want a brand new piece of sandpaper that's gonna stay true.
And a lot of the time too, like you'll get it there and something like that might happen and you're like, oh, that looks kind of crummy. And you can kind of finesse that shape out. Like there's definitely, this table has been used for 6 years, so this joint's opened a little bit, but I think that might have also been the same joint, piece of crap, piece of garbage. And what I bring this to. And I think on that, essentially what I did is I back cut the joint like a lot more. So basically if I have that little corner and it's looking a little rounded like that, I'll back cut that joint really deep. And then I'll kind of feather it and shape it. So if it's like dead square, that corner is maybe a little more like this. And by the time you get to your edge breaking, before you put together that little corner round with this in here. That's something that you kind of learn, like we've definitely learned in experience. Like when you first start doing this, and especially when we first started, because we're working for Hank, it was like, oh my God, everything has to be perfect before it goes together. And then you kind of learn where you can fudge, and it's not like you're letting things go. It's where you learn like, okay, if I sit here and take this whole thing down the square, it's going to take me 45 minutes to an hour. If I just kind of sweep it in very gradually over like 6 or 7 inches, no one will ever see that, and it'll be totally crisp and look flat.
Also, it's like what species are you working in? If it's something that's really hard, you kind of got to be more careful. If something's a little bit soft, the clamping pressure is going to help press that shoulder, and it'll help you make it look really clean.
You have a preference of species of wood to work with?
Oh man, we work
Everything.
like everything under the sun. We probably worked. I mean, it's
We for Hank had the good fortune of making a dining room table that had 52 different species of wood.
yeah.
It was really, really cool.
That was a wild experience.
But if you mention it and we haven't heard of it, then like, yes, we want to make. And we've made like poles out of like barberry and things that don't even necessarily get arborescent.
Yeah.
If it produces a woody stem, we want to know about it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What are we seeing here? What species do you have here tonight?
We can run through it.
Yeah. It's these are test parts, so
Yeah.
a lot of it's kind of like
Like mahogany, cherry.
So you have Cuban mahogany.
why do we use that for test parts?
I know, seriously. Cuban mahogany, white oak. This is actually sea grape. I was actually just telling you about this. It's a tree that grows in the Keys and in South America, all along the coast. And it grows in these forms that are, the trunks are usually about this big, and they grow like crab apples essentially. And they're really hard to get lumber out. And we have fallen into owning about 70 flitches of this, and they're all, from scale about this big to about, maybe about that wide, and big arches. So we can get small parts out of it, but you can't really get a lot of big things. We made 2 chest of drawers out of it, 8-drawer chest of drawers. And we've made a lot of small tables, but that's kind of it. It's this beautiful rose colored wood. It's a little bit mute now because it's, this is probably 8 years old or something. So sea grape, ambrosia, obviously. Really cool stuff. This is madrone. Madrone is a western wood. It's amazing to work. It smells like marshmallow. You know when you burn marshmallows over
Yeah.
fire? That's what it smells like when you work it, and it is stunning. And we actually ebonize this base with steel wool and vinegar, and it just turns this beautiful warm black and brown, like warm brown, dark brown tone.
It's more of an understory for me, so it'll get very big. You can imagine like our dogwoods around here. So that was kind of an exceptional piece. I don't know, actually know where that came from, but that was
I have
It's a
no
good
idea
show.
where it came from. That was like one of those moments where you're like, oh, you have? Okay, you have a drone. All right, great. Yeah, perfect. Some of the other species, this is just tulip poplar. It's a leg. We made 3 tall bar tables, we called them. Out of these last year, it was one was yew wood. Oh no, we made 2. Oh yeah, one was yew wood, one was walnut, and one was, what was the other one? It was sycamore. Did we make it sycamore?
sycamore.
Yeah. You guys ever seen courtesan sycamore?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those are better.
Oh man,
beautiful.
what beautiful stuff, huh? We use it all the time, and this table was wild. It was just completely perfect medullary raise cut all the way through it. It was gorgeous stuff.
What none of us will ever see is flat sawn sycamore.
Yeah, it's unstable. Yeah,
It just turns into.
it just goes. It's kind of amazing when you think about like courtesan sycamore. It's one of the more stable woods I've ever worked. And then the flat sawn stuff is the most dynamic. You know, if you get it, it's just completely.
Yew wood is by far though the most dynamic wood we've ever worked.
Yes.
Factor in like 300% waste when you're doing a job. Like that's rule of thumb. It is riddled with checks and shapes and knots, and then you take a piece to a saw and you're halfway through, and the offcuts out here. I mean, it's like really roll.
I've broken bandsaw blades on that stuff where you're just cutting
What's
into
in
it and
it?
just
This
pushes
is
on it, breaks it.
you like YEW. So there's circumvolt.
You would years ago to make the longbows.
Exactly.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So that was Taxus baccata, that's an English yew, and those get very big and very arborescent. This is actually Taxus brevifolia, which is a native to the States. It's a West Coast yew wood, which is again more like an understory wood. But yeah, the baccata, they look very similar. They work very similar. They're both a nightmare, but they flex. They do flex. They made it really good for the bow.
Yeah, it's really.
Have you worked the American chestnut?
We have.
Yeah, we made we have a handful of clear boards of chestnut that we found in New York in a barn.
We're not going to tell you where they are.
Um,
There are.
I'll tell you where I get mine either.
Yeah, that stuff is chestnut is probably one of the more amazing woods I've ever worked. It's it's like working air and then it's hard. You're like, what? I don't understand what's actually happening. And all the flat sawn grain is just, you can see into it. It feels like, it doesn't feel like, it's exactly what you'd expect of wood. It doesn't feel like a fruit wood. It's like, ring forest.
Where do you source most of your wood?
So we go to a lot of small lumber yards, usually private dudes who are just cutting trees down, cutting
Guys
trees.
like
and-
Joe.
Yeah, exactly. Joe is actually a guy we use all the time where we'll pop in there. We had a beech tree come down on a client's house and they want us to make some stuff out. So we hadn't cut all the wood. And we're walking through there and we're like, oh, okay, you got a entire log talpa. All right, you have an entire log of ash right here. And twisted red oak crotches. And like, okay, cool. We'll just take this and take that, take this. Because it's just, the prices are usually really affordable because they're not trying to make it.
It's all local.
Yeah, it's all local. It's not like they're, you go to Reader Hardwoods and they're wonderful, but it is like, and you are gonna pay for it. And it's like, it almost makes no sense to go to those places unless you're like doing a job. Like we just did restaurant tables and you're like, all right, we need red oak. We need, 184 feet of red oak. Let's just go to Reader. But it is really fun to go to those other guys who are taking trees. Matt Davidson's another one. I just bought a bunch of ash from him because it's just, he's like, oh, I got this really cool ash in that Keith Yoff cut. And do you want to see it? I'm like, yeah. It's like that exciting moment.
I do a lot of old green.
Do you?
In my day job, we service all the local tree companies.
Oh, really?
We go around and get some. I turned some English view that was phenomenal.
I bet that's really.
I found a chunk of caliper.
Wow. Wow.
12.99.
Jeez.
And last week I turned some false cypress.
Oh, yeah.
You ever heard that?
Yeah.
Well, pretty.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
We just got, do you guys know about, what's the name of that place that just shut down?
All I can remember is the guy's name.
Like DuPont?
Yeah.
Oh, not.
Yeah, Newport
You
Nautical.
guys know Newport? Yeah.
Yeah.
So
They're just closed.
they just
Yeah.
closed and they had an auction of their lumber. Because, you know, and it was, you know, you look at the guy's prices originally and you're like, oh my God, I can't afford anything from him. And then the auction, we were able to get a lot of wood for almost nothing. So that was another one of our like, okay, cool. We are totally wood hoarders. Like it's sick. It's disgusting.
Yeah,
We have way too much wood. We have a warehouse here, a container here.
if anybody needs some sycamore or hickory or something, like, you should call us, because we've got
Yeah,
a lot of.
Yeah, we
seriously.
have.
We've got several like shop buyouts in our time, kind of, it's where we got a lot of our machinery, and we just, the guy, you know, gets older and is kind of hanging it up, and yes, he doesn't want to deal with it, his wife doesn't want to deal with it. We offer them, here's the bulk price, we'll just take everything, so you don't have to worry about it, it's out of your hair, and we'll, you know, discard what we don't need, but we've got a lot of,
Yeah, it's all come to it, like we found a lot of our lumber, it's all usually like string of luck, you know, unless we're sourcing something. But we have enough in stock now that oftentimes we don't have to leave the shop to go get lumber, or we don't have to like leave our collection.
and we build for Hank, who also has a mountain.
Yeah, yeah. And so if he's doing a job, he's like, hey, we're gonna make this thing out of, you know, figured myrtle. I don't have to go find figured myrtle. He's just like, I have the boards, don't worry, just come grab them, bring them back to your shop. So that works out really nicely.
Just looking for an article, my brother sent me about a week or so ago in the New York Times about people now really sourcing and planting chestnut trees.
That's great. That'd
If
be,
I can find it.
yeah,
It's about a week ago.
yeah. It's,
It'll take a while.
Yeah, take a while.
Better late than never.
I know, I mean, but they can start it up. I mean, why not? A lot of time, like with the chestnut we got, it was a random call. We just got a random call. They had some lumber. We went and looked at it and we were like, oh, what are these boards? They were all covered in mold and all this other stuff. And we're like, oh,
Mouse nests.
we just like, yeah, rat's nest. Oh my God. There was like, we were up in this barn, up in these rafters, pulling these boards out. And our, you know, we're 15 feet up in the air, pulling these boards out, and there's mice running right by your head. And you're like, oh God, what am I getting into?
Yeah.
But it was cool because we got back to the shop. We actually thought it was, what do we think it was? It was
I don't know, but it was so
butternut.
messy.
It was butternut. And then we pulled it down and we were like, this is chestnut. And it's not touched, it's perfectly clear and flat sawn and oh my God. Yeah. So it's, you know, those random moments when you get that phone call or you look on Facebook Marketplace and you see that tree that somebody's talking about that they just want out of there. A lot of the time, which is, you know, why we have our problem, is we just go get it. We're like, all right, cool.
I've
Davidson
gotten-
too.
Some of the stuff I've gotten off of Facebook was,
It's amazing.
you know, like I've got some, I'm not sure what it is yet. 'Cause I gave some to Barry, the stuff from the Medfield house.
Yeah.
What did you decide that was?
I forgot now. I got so much stuff from you.
There was a place up in Medfield, a house that was built in 1784. And he was doing a complete renovation of it, and so he had a whole bunch of stuff that he was
Yeah.
getting, you know, with it was getting thrown away.
Yeah.
So the big piece I've got is, this thing is like about this wide, about this tall. It was the bottom frame, part of the bottom framing for the main fireplace
Oh, wow.
of this 3-story house built in 1784,
Yeah.
and it's about 10 feet long. And
Wow.
damn thing, I think the way thing weighs like 300 to 400 pounds.
You told me it was a star from Noah's Ark. Yeah.
Where do you get your clientele from? Previous customers, word of mouth?
It's word of mouth. Yeah, it's basically all, it's, you know, we are starting to get into the marketing side of things because we're realizing how hard it can be sometimes where you're like, oh my God, I'm hoping everything works out. But mostly it's, you make a piece for a client and they usually come back and want something else. Or somebody tells them about us and they come by and see the shop, and that usually triggers, excitement to try to commission something. I think it's really hard in our field because people get swigged out about commissioning furniture. They don't know how to approach it, which is a really understandable thing. I mean, it's like going to somebody to be like, I want you to do a portrait of I want to go to this painter to do a portrait of my family. It's like, oh, I can't even imagine how much that would cost. I can't do that. And you just back off. But a lot of the time it feels intimidating because you don't know what you're, it's a totally different field. But it's lucked out the moments where somebody's reached out and we're really open to talking with them and walking them through the process, because it's not that complicated, and it's just, it's worked out a couple times.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we're frankly like surprised sometimes where clients come from.
Yeah.
And to be completely transparent, we're not strictly doing furniture. I mean, we're 6 years into our business and we're still spending a lot of time working for our previous mentor. So we build this stuff, but we're happy to build kitchen boxes and whatever you need. If it's made out of wood, we'll figure it out. Yeah.
You guys go to art school, or you just picked up on your own?
Picked up on our own.
Yeah, no, school. We fell into the guild world of wood, it's like the working for this guy who luckily was, he was patient with us. That was one big thing. And he was willing to teach and take the time and the cost of when you're teaching somebody and you have an apprentice, at least one person in your shop is dedicated to that person, and you lose a ton of money that year. And when you're running a small business, that happens so fast and it can be really scary. Hank, luckily, when I started, I had one guy ahead of me that I worked under for about 4 or 5 months. And so the transition period of when he left to me working for Hank, at least I had some training beforehand, but it is a lot of just thrown in the fire. And I say I would not have learned any of this if I was going into a school aspect. I was not good in school. I couldn't keep my focus. Getting thrown in the fire, you're like, okay, I got to sink or swim. I got to do this. And when it's under the name of somebody who's, been in the MFA, he's got pieces all over the world. It's like, oh my God, I have to nail this. So you're just really cautious, and you just learn over time. And he knows how much to throw at you. He's really good. He
designs to your capabilities.
Yeah.
Where you're at for the most part. We don't have art degrees, but we can say, and this is not to toot our own horn. We were lucky. If you don't know Hank's work, you should look it up, because the guy's amazing, and it was very serendipitous for us to land with him. But in our time there, and even in our own shop now, we have RISD students graduating, coming to us out of the furniture program saying, how the frig do you do that? How do I do this? So we both feel really lucky to have such hands-on experience, not only into just making, frankly, at the end of it, making is kind of the easy part for us, the business side, finding the clients, that's the stuff that's more challenging. And I feel like you leave RISD with a degree that's going to help you teach at RISD or something else. But as far as going out and doing a small creative shop or something.
Yeah, it's kind of always a shock to us. I actually was in a relationship with a girl who did the furniture program there. And I was learning from Hank while she was at RISD, and I the things that we were learning and the level of, it was we were learning at Hank's, we're learning how to identify the trees, how to work any species, how to look at a tree to cut it, how to cut the joint, how to design, where the basis of the design is coming from. Where in history did you see something that triggered this thought in your mind to make this piece, and then how to actually execute it and shape it and do everything. And then I was talking with her, and the whole process, she's just like, it's nowhere near this involved. It's just not the same. And we did feel very grateful, because we've had a few RISD students come through, and it is a shock how little they know of. They can design and they can draw, and they're
great at computer
they're
programs.
great. Yeah.
And designing on a computer.
And
in 10 years, maybe they'll put us out of business that way. But till then,
yeah.
it's bad.
Yeah, we do everything full scale, everything's sketched and then full scale drawn and drafted with pencils, 5H, and you're just really careful. It's the best way. We build full chest of drawers off with drawings like that. You can just hold the piece right on it and marked your mortises,
Yeah.
you know it's perfect, you know.
And you can really get a better idea of scale of parts and how things relate to one another, so it doesn't feel awkward or bulky, or that's actually, we were talking about test parts earlier. The test part's good for that as well. There's
Yeah.
a lot of times
Yeah.
where not only is it cut to make sure your joint is right, but when you're shaping, you can kind of look at it and say, should we take more? Should we make it, what if we play with this shape?
Yeah, we change stuff all the time. I'd say like almost nothing comes right off. Like you hardly ever draw a piece in our shop and then make that piece. It usually things grow. You'll be milling the lumber. You're like, oh, you know what? This leg could be a little bit thinner. This leg could be a little thicker. You just draw one line that changes that dimension on the drawing, and then you make it to that. Or you make the test part, and you're like, man, this feels a little bit bulky. Like this piece. What piece was it? I think it was actually this piece. We changed this thing, like we made this particular piece right here. We made it all out of sycamore. It had this same detail, all the stepping rounded shoulders. And we kind of were like, we're looking at it and we're like, I don't really like it. I don't like that. I don't like how hard it is. It doesn't play with the rest of the soft shapes. And so in the next piece, we made it more of a coffee table, height table. And we changed this detail completely and changed this detail completely. And it came out, this is actually that table. Yeah. And it looked a lot better in general. Like the scale of everything was better and
And you can
felt
see,
nicer.
then it went a little bit further.
Yeah.
Now we're looking.
We
for
went a little bit.
ponies, but We're having fun with the idea and changing it around.
I feel this too, yeah.
Are you gonna be at the furniture show?
Not this year.
Yeah, we won't be
We
unfortunately.
were last year.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, there's another.
show, yeah, it's like-
So you never like pin this?
Well, if it's
Oh, dude.
if it's glued and cross clamped, you don't have to worry about pinning it. But there are, like, I'd say,
We do pin for sure.
50% of the time we'll pin. Yeah, 50%, depending on what the joint's doing. Like we've been making these large center pedestal tables recently that I don't know, the last 3 years for some reason we've made a ton of them. Yeah, Afro table. And when you have certain joints, like we had the center post, a leg that comes into it with a tenon, and then this big span of a top above it, and you have to have this foot that arches out, and then another stretcher that's going up and connecting to the battens.
Yeah.
And so to do that, like you could rely on the glue and the strength of the joint, but to cover your ass, you want to pin that thing too. Even if it's done very like
Yeah.
in a light way, so it's not jumping out at you. Because that's one thing that like I was saying earlier, or was getting into with the tenons, is you can overdo it really quick with joinery. Like you throw a pin on everything, it's gonna be way too much. You're gonna feel like it's just like you can't even touch this thing because it feels textured. Where like we try to do the least amount as possible, but if we do pin, it's always proud. We never flush them. Because over time, pins are going to move, they're going to move in and out, and you're going to end up with little weird steps all over the piece. And it's one of those things we just avoid. So,
If we're building outdoor furniture too, we pin.
oh, we pin everything that goes outside. Yeah. That's,
So when you say you don't bring a flush, like how proud do you leave it?
we'll leave it. Do we have any examples? I don't think we have any examples of it. We'll usually leave it like somewhere around a 16th, depending on what. Oh, this is actually a pretty good example right here. These little stoppers that I put up here to hold.
Yeah.
Those are actually sunk in about 5/16, and that's about that to a little bit taller is about the max we'll go if you pin something, depending on the detail. If it's something where, oh, here's another. Yeah, those are all pinned, and that's a detail for that too.
Since you pointed those pins out.
Did you cut these before you got this to this shape so that you match the grain perfect?
Exactly. Well, no, so these didn't come out of these. Yeah, this didn't come out of this.
Because they look dead on.
Oh yeah, that's my anal.
So you just
Three points, make a
you
plane.
didn't.
No,
You just
No.
search for the match.
I just was like, okay, does this look like?
Because if you did and thought that's where I had it,
Yeah, this one runs like kind of perfectly through here in the grain too.
but
It's
it looks.
yeah,
Yeah, that was like a dead match.
yeah. I was
Even this to the slight
Yeah.
circle, you can see a little.
yeah. That was like moments of like, that's
You
those
must have
moments
searched
where
through
you're like,
pieces to find that.
okay, there's one. And it's actually kind of funny. I think I just basically took a cutoff from one of these stretches
Well, that's what I'm saying. It had to be from a
and drilled like
where that was.
yeah, I think I just drilled a bunch of them and I was like, whatever one lands kind of close. It's all when you really think about it, if you're standing this far away, all that disappears, all that green kind of disappears. It's when you get up on it. So only makers like you guys have noticed it, which I appreciate. I'm like,
The whole reason why you did it. right?
literally why I did it. I actually have
Well, that's
photographs on our website of that detail because
You
it's
either
like,
thought far enough ahead before you got that shape to the piece, so you take the. plug
yeah,
out,
and also we
Or
normally
you
do-
search through everything else. It took
and
even longer.
it's funny too, because this piece in particular, we normally pin with end grain. So it's when you're drilling your pins with your pin cutter or your dowel cutter, you're drilling down lengthwise, because when you're pinning something, you don't want to be pinning with short grain, you want to be pinning with long grain. So
Right.
so we normally have end grain poles, but in this particular application, I was like, I want to see long grain. So it was like kind of actually the first time I ever did that. And it is fun to do that type of stuff. That's like it's like the trick of it. People are like, how'd you pull
Well, that's
that
the
out
thing,
of that?
you either thought of that,
You
it's
should
neat
all the
you
way
thought
down.
ahead, or it's neat that you took all the time to go searching.
There's a lot of thinking ahead. We were trained to make lists start to finish, finish
Okay.
to start. Pretty much
Yeah.
before we do everything. We don't always do it. It gets away from us, but it's in our heads for sure.
Oh, yeah.
Very subtle.
Yeah. Thanks, man. I'm glad you like that. That's like one of those things I'm like, no one has ever, I think you and me have got that. That's it. I'd be like,
That's
yeah,
what we
just
say
have
too, when we're like, it's for us, right? Like, it's really for us, right? Like, the
Yeah.
workers in general, because we're the guys and girls who notice that stuff. There's so many clients that are like beautiful and walk away and they could give a damn
Never
if
look at
the
it
week's
again.
closed or whatever. They're
Yeah.
picking form and color. That's it, you know? It's select few get
It
really
is like,
crappy,
yeah,
for sure.
but not, it's not often.
Form and color. That's it.
Yeah, so I don't know, that's the start of where, we, like Ron said, like the listing everything start to finish is like, if you have the image in your mind of what you're gonna build. And you want to know exactly how it's gonna go together perfectly. I mean, like, there's times like I'll write an entire list, start to finish. And then run back through it and be like, okay, that's gonna go over here.
Yeah.
And like readjust, like 15 is now 3. 3 is now, 16 or 17. Like your steps change
Right.
as you think about the piece. And then you start thinking like, oh man, this is, if I go right down this list, exactly how I wrote it out, this is gonna be a straight movement forward. There'll be no sidestepping, no backstepping.
Yeah. You get the list and chart tools,
Yeah.
you will drink less when you get home.
So when you're designing. I'm just curious, like, how much time do you put like into the drafting table versus completing the piece?
It depends. I mean, we draw and Hank draws enough to build the piece. It's just that amount. It's
Just that amount.
never
It's
more
not
than
the
that.
great
Like,
detail.
it's not
Yeah.
every single
Capture
detail, because
every
like we
detail.
said, like it always changes.
Capturing everything that-
Hank taught us, you're not like, it's kind of it doesn't totally make sense, but I see where it's coming from. It's like, you're not getting paid when you're to draw.
Right.
basically. Like, you're at the bench and you're making the piece, that's gonna lead to some cash flow. No, we draw as much as we can
Yeah,
do.
drawing-
Just enough to get there. I mean, there are times like when we sub workout, like, which is, I think we've probably subbed like 3 things our entire lives out. When we sub something out, we'll draw every single detail because it is one of those moments. And oftentimes we won't sub anything that's new. Like if it's a new piece coming out, we do it because we're like, oh, it's all gonna change. And then the next time we make it, we can do all those adjustments and send it out. But yeah, if it's somebody doing the piece for us, which is never really, we will draw every single detail, knowing that they need every single detail, because they're not, they haven't been doing this.
You don't want
Under
them to
Hank
take
for
their
X amount of
liberties.
time or us. What's that?
You don't want them to take their liberties.
We've done that. We've totally done that and been like, what the hell is this? I'm like, all right, let's remake this stretcher completely. You remember that thing, the trestle table? We had this trestle table. It was like a small little shaker elliptical trestle table, about 32 tall, or 20, maybe it was 29. And we were like, gosh, make one of the stretchers, like do something fun with the stretchers. I don't know. Just as long as the ends look like this and it's strong, we'll do it. And like the guy made like I was like, oh.
Was it strong?
It was fine. Yeah, I mean, it held up, but I was like, oh man, I would never in my life do this. But that's the thing, is like, that's where it comes in. Like, this is why you do that. So you're like, okay, next time I know to just give him the full drawing. Like, it's all good. You did a great job building it, but next time, I mean, Hank's done that with me or us where
Yeah,
he's
that's
given us a
true. And that
piece,
particular, sorry,
and he's like,
that particular table, put all
It's
the
like,
hard stuff right underneath.
you know, just do something fun here. And I'm like, all right,
Oh, the
cool.
details,
Like,
yeah.
I've been working for the guy for 13 years. I know how he thinks. And I'll do
It's
something
strong.
like, he's gonna love this. And he's like, oh, I would have never done that. I won't do that again.
It is.
And you're like,
Yeah, totally.
we'll do that again. That's like,
Yeah, this one we do, that's when we started to.
Yeah.
I think we had
Yeah.
this space.
It's
and then
fun.
we're like,
And
glass top, and then we can start to play with that.
unfortunately, we
detail
didn't
will show up more. Then we end up changing
with it, but we do. a lot
that
of
joint. Also,
dovetail,
that joint
a
is
lot of dovetail. work.
tenon. Not only is it lamp, tenon comes out through here.
Biggest thing we ever
So it's
made was a,
More
it
of
was a
visual
6
tenon.
foot tall vanity, had 3 feet of dovetails on every corner. And so it's 12 feet of hand cut dovetails.
We have a ton of it if you want some.
Yeah.
Seriously, if
It's
you want
all
to buy
empty.
boards, like, we'll be totally
And it
fair.
was
We
just
we
like,
have,
oh my God, a piece
boards
of
that
work.
come with-
But you can kind of see, I think we have,
Yeah, I'm always quarter.
we have like one table.
Founding
here.
members
Oh,
of
yeah,
WBA.
Yeah.
This guy is all miter dovetails right here.
WBA.
Definitely inspired.
Oh, I got you. I see what you're saying. I'm on the 12th.
That was a money learning experience. Like, I'm on some crazy drawing out piece. Just have fun. Yeah, through tenons, lapping tenons, dovetails, drawer components. You know, I think even the back had like lap joints in it too. Just a little bit of everything, and that's like a lot of the time when like we're experimenting with designs. We try to tailor down versus busy, as we were saying with pins and tenons and all this stuff. So if we're, you know, like if we're doing through tenons, it'll be, we'll sometimes wedge with other woods, but a lot of the time we'll just wedge with the same wood so it disappears. It's not these black lines all over it, strikes all over the piece. Because it, I don't know, I feel like it's a little nicer on the eye, but yeah, you know. But yeah, I mean,
Curious, if you guys have like a favorite or two joinery book, like go to or don't even bother reading that stuff.
oh, you know, honestly, I wish I brought it. I was gonna bring Ernest Joyce. Yeah. So I have a particular book that we refer back to. It's Ernest Joyce, the Encyclopedia of Furniture Making. Alan Peters did a revision on it too, and it's unbelievable. I mean, everything you need to know about joinery and design and veneer work and hardwood work, and I mean, it is just the Bible of woodworking.
Yeah.
If you guys don't know it, it's like I was gonna bring it tonight. I totally forgot at the shop. That's a go-to. There's a couple like Japanese joinery books that I kind of like jump back in between. A lot of temple building books for Japanese temple building, because there's a lot of interesting. You're like, oh man, you can kind of apply that to a nice piece of furniture and be quiet and nice. But I don't do a lot of like, honestly, I stick to those because it's just, I can understand it like easier. It's quick. I'm like, oh, and it kind of opens it up for me. But Ernest Joyce,
Encyclopedia of Furniture.
yeah, Encyclopedia of Furniture Making.
It's dense. Like I remember
Yeah.
first year there, flipping it open and being like, this could be hieroglyphics to me. And now
Oh, totally.
I got like an eighth of it. I think I got like an eighth of it understood.
Oh, man,
There's
it's
a lot of
definitely
information.
tremendous.
It's really good.
We just did this knuckle joint, which we just did a expansion table, well, a drop leaf. And I had always wanted to make a knuckle joint, and we made a Cuban mahogany drop leaf, and that book, man, it tells you exactly how to do this. And it even tells you like, you know, use a brass rod, don't use wood, because wood is gonna move and swell, and then this thing will bind up and do crazy things over time. Use a brass rod. And then it even talks about the back cutting and shaping of this. This was a test, so it's not perfect, but it's kind of amazing. I mean, it's one of those things where this is a really clearly decorative, practical joint. Like if you want to take the time to do it, man, it's so worth it. This is a gratifying joint. And it's stronger than a hinge. I mean, it's way stronger. You cannot break this thing. I mean, if you wanted to really beat on it, you could, but for what it was doing, this like simple little, you know, arm lever, it was really fun, and a nice little detail under the table to look at, you know. So yeah, you guys want
How are you cutting it?
the curve?
Yeah.
So I actually, so I start out by cutting just basic finger joints on it and mapping out with
So you can
scribes.
straight, just a straight two pieces finger joint.
Yep, and actually here, if you look at the top of it, I think I have all my scribes on it still. You can kind of see it, but basically I map out so I know the exact dimension of the circle I'm gonna be using with razors and 5H pencils. And you cut your finger joints so they're a little oversized, they'll fit the circle. And then basically you get it so it's comfortable like this, and then you do table saw cuts to create the partial of the round, and then you shape it by hand. You just are really, really careful about it. Thank you. Thanks. And it's tedious work, but once you get the back cut in the joint, like the actual, like the yeah, yeah. That's good to hear, man. It's like, I'm like, that's what I wanted.
It's a funny conundrum of getting good enough with your hands to make it look machined.
Yeah, and that's like, that's when it feels good, because if it looks sloppy for us, it's like so not gratifying. We're like, all right, well, that was rough. You know, I'll sometimes even remake the part, but when it's really crisp and clean and it feels,
So on the real piece, did that hinge go all the way across the table?
it was short. It was about the same length as this, but it was like a small
The top was probably about this big.
size, and the drop leaves and the drops came from right here and here. And so it only needed to come out to where the hinges were. So it was probably about that long. And so the swing arm came out dead center to
Oh, I
up
see.
here.
All
So,
right.
so that was locked into the piece, and then the swing arm came out this way. But yeah, I mean, there's times that we've done it so it's, you know, bigger, and it's not any more complicated. You just have to, like, you know, you just don't think about how big the
Yeah.
piece is, and you're like, okay, I have a lot of risk of demolishing a very nice piece of wood
No,
right now.
I thought you were describing that the whole drop was that hinge.
Oh, no.
That's it.
Like,
That's
oh
insane.
my God, that would be, no. Like dovetails are enough, man.
I said, that's a lot of work.
Yeah, that would be fun to do though. Didn't we talk about doing that on a cabinet door? Like doing like a cabinet door that was like,
Oh, yeah, it was like yeah.
yeah, here, I'll pass it right over here. Yeah.
You'll notice that a lot of how we work is all reduction shaping. We might laminate to get thickness sometimes, but all of our shaping, all of our joinery, you're removing weight, you're not adding weight. Which is, you know, a lot of it, if you take too much, you took too much, and that's a wrap kind of for that part. You grab another part. Yeah, that's kind of like, these are two really good examples of the reduction shaping. Is this piece starts out as a, you know, I guess it would probably have been about 4x3 inch wide piece that's, you know, yay long. And you write out your process, and a lot of the time on test pieces, I'll cut a little deeper than I need to on them, just to make sure next time I go into this, I know exactly where that line is, you know. And this is like, you know, this piece starts out as a block, and then you end up with a wrapping piece of wood. It looks like something that was just folded over, but it's all one solid piece. And same with like plus tenon keys. A lot of the time, instead of doing a traditional just key, which I love, I really like this simple, you know, it's a simple structural thing. It's practical, it's perfect, it's going to keep that table together. We'll decorate them a little bit in a way of, like, you know, reduction cutting. So we'll cut everything on the bandsaw and fit the whole tenon, and then we'll do something interesting with the shape of the top, just so it adds a little bit of interest. Is there? Where's the other one? Interesting's two at that. 3 total. We had another one, you know, I must be in the car. And these are really fun because you can have a blast with that. You can go anywhere with the shapes on that. I mean, that's like, we started out, whenever you start at our shop, we start with tchotchke, sharpening tchotchkes. Tchotchkes, just small wooden objects that are carved. And what we'll do is we'll do pretty complicated. If the person's pretty comfortable with it, we'll start them off with simple waves in a board or something they shape with a file and a rasp. And then if they do good with that, we're like, all right, let's see how your chisel work is and your shoulder plane work. And we'll make things that are really layered in, you know, a block that's reduced down into this form that looks like everything's glued up, but it's one solid piece. And that's kind of like, that's the funnest aspect. That's my favorite part of shaping is when we take something that looks, people are like, oh, that's like an applied cone to a piece. You know, you must have done it. You have little tenons in there. You're like, no, that's shaped out of one piece.
And it's,
Some of it frankly looks kind of simple, like when you first look at the shapes. And then you think about a tapering round with an arch. Once you start to try to make it, you realize it's like making it 3D. It takes practice. But that's, I say that because that's why we try to do, here's the detail, here's the structural, practical element. And here's something that's not overwrought, it's not over busy, just a nice form. And then there's a balance there. It's not overwrought. There isn't too much going on. I feel like we both feel like there are a lot of like incredible woodworkers, and their designs are just like, and I can do this, and I can do this, and I can do this, and you get a hodgepodge of all these like incredibly tactfully well done details. But to look at the piece, it's like, holy shit, there's so much going. It's too busy.
yeah, can be a lot.
So on that piece that you're holding, you wouldn't pin that's. You would just rely on.
Yeah, we would align, especially because this is tenon up into something up here.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
So the idea of it splaying out
Yeah.
that way. This is actually for a bench, so it's gonna get romped around on, but that was plenty strong.
Yeah, that was like, I think even the upper plate or the batten of that thing was tapered too. It was like a angle too, to create that, to help with that angle there. And when you have all those angles coming in together and you have that binding structure, like that's so strong, like you don't need to worry about that thing coming apart ever. And usually if we're doing really short tenons like that, like the tenons that are coming in here, these are actually, this is a double tenon that's coming in here with a step. And when you're doing something that short, this is another thing that we learned with joinery experiences. Certain woods react differently to joinery. If you want it to be, a thin leg that's 1 inch stretchers going into, you don't want to make that stretcher really, really tight because it'll break the leg, split it. This aspect, like it was a 1/2 inch tenon short, it's probably no longer than 1 inch in there. We made that joint really tight on the real one. So when you're putting it together, it's going pop, 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 pop. You're really fighting it to close. Because it's short, it's bindy, and you don't need to worry. It's so far away from the top of the leg, you don't need to worry about it breaking the leg. There are times that we'll be putting something together and you're like, you hear some cracks and then you're like, oh, that's not good.
Why a double tenon as opposed to one wider tenon, more glue contact?
Yeah. And if it was like a big thick tenon, there is that, the aspect of like more movement, but also like we don't want to take all the mass out of that leg too, like or the vertical or the piece it's sitting in. Like that's a lot of the time too. Like when we'll do long
Yeah, this probably has it.
so we don't want to lose all this mass. Like we only need the contact here and here. If we want to do a whole tenon, you're losing all this mass in the bottom of that foot that's getting all this weight. Like what if somebody's up on top of the table dancing or something, like you don't want to lose all this strength. Yeah.
Right, yeah.
So like that's a lot of time when you see these joints, when we're doing those, a lot of the
It's to
time.
protect that piece.
What's that?
Yeah.
To protect that.
It's protect the strength of that, exactly. Because I totally, when I was a rookie, man, I totally just like, oh, that's fine, I'll just mortar straight through it and then break the leg, or break that.
Yeah, this piece gives me an opportunity to ask a question.
Great.
It's something that I've not seen done. I don't know whether it's. When we did the workshop up at the Shaker Village, we were doing the through tenons with wedges. And I got to thinking about something that is, whether it's something that's done or not, but I got this idea of, do something like this where it's going in, but then as a tenon with a wedge tenon, but a hidden wedge by
Inside the joint.
inside of here, put it in, you put the wedge, you put it in, and then when you drive it in,
Press
it
it.
drives the wedge into.
Yeah.
I don't know,
It can be
obviously,
done.
since you know what I'm talking about,
Yeah.
that's something that is a common
That's a
thing.
thing. Yeah.
It's called fox wedging.
Yeah.
Fox
Oh,
wedging, yeah.
what?
Foxtail, yeah.
Foxtail wedding, okay. So I was just wondering, it's like,
Encyclopedia of furniture making. It sounds like you got your hands on the
because
book.
it seemed to me, when I'm thinking about it, it was like, well, that should be super strong because it's not gonna be able to pull out and it's gonna help pull this piece in
It'll lock
as
it for
it,
sure.
as it locks it in.
A lot of the time, it's a matter of, accuracy of joint cutting. Because I have seen in the past other people do that and they didn't plan right and it either splits the piece or it puts a lot of pressure on that. Like let's say there's a little check in here that we don't see. When you're pushing it through and it's splaying that tendon way out, it'll check the leg, which can happen. And or they didn't cut their wedge properly or it wasn't, long enough. And what happens is
Yeah.
you're pushing it in and then all of a sudden you get a dead stop and you have a 16th of shoulder open still.
Now there's no way.
And
now
you're
it's
like
like,
sitting there hammering on it and next thing you know,
Oh,
you
yeah.
break the leg then, it's like,
You can do it, just do a lot of tests.
it is that like figuring, but that's kind of the fun part about what we do, that's this figuring out those details of being like, no one knows it's in there, but that feels good for me. We've done lap joints in feet, like trestle feet like this that are wide, where they're a lap joint, a bridle coming over, that's housed and cased, and then two tenons coming through to the bottom, and then you flip the table base over and we wedge them from the bottom, which is another thing like you can do. You can just make a detail out of it, make it a pretty thing. That's always the fun thing when somebody lifts it, 10-foot long dining room table over, never.
Oh.
But it feels good for us, right? That's like the moment you're like, hell yeah, that thing's strong as hell. It's not gonna come apart,
It's like strong, sometimes it's stronger than necessary than it really is. Like in that joint that you're talking about, I feel like that's a hard way to do. And we're pros at doing things the hard way that could be done easier, but that is like a hard gamble to achieve a joint that you could achieve the same strength from another way, basically. That's how I feel about it. The simpler way,
Yeah.
drive it through or pin it.
And also if you cross clamp, the amount of like when you can get to a joint that you can cross clamp, if you have 1,000 pounds of pressure on that thing from the clamp.
Yeah, does everybody know when we're talking about cross clamping? Like just because I don't want to talk to people like they're laymen, but I also don't want, if you don't know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
You clamp once the tendon is seated into the mortise, you apply clamping pressure to this piece, almost like you're crimping the sandwich, and that's just helping drive the glue into the fibers deeper. So that pressure goes a long way. So a lot of times, in other words, we've got glue in our tendons, we've clamped it this way. So now we know our shoulder's nice and tight. Then we get our blocks, we cross clamp it this way. And that pressure is so much, we'll just take this clamp right off.
Yeah.
And that joint's gonna stay closed and you're gonna have a strong bond.
Yeah. And a lot of the time, I think it says it on the Type on bottles. It says like, activation at X amount of pounds per, pressure pound per inch or something like that. I can't remember exactly what it is, but that was the moment where I was like, oh, wait a minute, you need a cross clamp with glue? I didn't realize, like, I've never even done that. And then we started doing it and it was like, man, you could, like this joint right here, this came up and through clean. Like I made sure it was clean, but I kept it a little bit loose because there's so much length in that tendon and so much length in the laps that you don't want it to be wildly tight coming through.
You don't want to hear it going.
You don't want to break, exactly, you don't want to break this thing. And like when you glue these up in particular to these types of joints, it usually you leave the length of that tendon on there and you lock this all off after.
To avoid the risk of not coming up far enough.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's stopping, all of them are stopping at the same point. And then, so what you do there is to avoid having all that tension there, you kind of back cut the joint a little bit, not a lot. It's like a very finer amount. And maybe even sand the laps a little bit. So it's really smooth coming in, maybe like a little 20 just lightly to knock the fibers off. And then when you glue that, you put a lot of glue on surfaces and you cross clamp it. Like, I mean, I've never, like, these have never opened up, these upper joints, and those were not wildly tight. This is kind of a little bit of that, like, how far can you push this type of wood and how far can you push this type of joint? And also it's wedged side to side to top and bottom here. So that cross clamping action, like I wouldn't even need to wedge it really. Like that was just totally decorative to make sure it was tight.
What are
That's
the
it. The wedges are on the So you'll see right. The end right there and right there, see that a little bit, this tiny bit. So what happens right there is I essentially cut that joint square here. And this one square, oh no, this is cut, sorry, that's this one's cut square. Let me see what it's like piece. And so that follows the angle, and then this is mortise square, so I know it's gonna be clean, and when this comes up through, you wedge the front and back. So you're not, you're not fighting, you don't wanna fight these points when you're pressing something through, because what happens is, as the tenons come through, it can grab this end grain and rip this whole thing off. And as you can see, you would likes to, it tends to be kind of flaky really on this point. So that's why you do that, and that's, it's funny because the detail, it looks like this runs straight across, but that's actually forward. And the same thing with the tenon that comes up through that, it's a tenon that looks like this, and then the back of it is actually cut with a table saw at that angle. So it creates the space in the wedge, and you push it through, it's wedged and clean.
Question.
Is there some reason you guys prefer Tide Bond over high glue? Do you use so little glue you don't get squeezed out at all?
No, we definitely get squeezed out.
Yeah,
And honestly,
Yeah.
we were trained, we just always used Type Bond, pressure activated. I actually just used high glue for the first time earlier this year. I was taking a Windsor chairmaking class. And I liked it, but it's just not, you gotta heat it up. I mean, I know there are alternatives, but Type Bond works just fine. It's easy to grab in any hardware store.
Squeeze out on these fancy woods, you just scrape it off.
Yeah.
Yep, yeah, we go in right away. We never let it sit and dry at all. A lot of people are like, oh, you should sit and let it dry for 15 minutes and then peel it off. We go as soon as that glue comes out and everything's clamped up, we go right in with chisels, clean it up, scrape, sand it, leave it.
And we're also really careful with how we're applying glue.
Yeah.
We're conscious of the squeeze that we're gonna get and where it is and how easy it is to get to. But yeah,
You glue in an inside joint, do you put any finish on first and then glue second, or do you always glue first and finish second?
I think like the question is like an inside joint, and it's gonna be like if we're doing panels and stuff, I think it's essentially like we'll apply oil or something before we glue up the carcass.
Mhm.
So, when time goes on, expansion and retraction, we know we got it. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. That's it. We'll do that. Anything that could move and open up and show over time, we'll usually oil just enough, like especially if there's gonna be glue on it, like we'll oil just enough so before you need to have your bond and glue. If you have oil there and that glue is on the oil, it won't bond properly. So we always, if you're careful about it, and on a shoulder, if that's also what you're saying too, like a shoulder, like if you're gluing, you see. Like if I'm gluing this piece up right here, side to side, I won't oil anything in here. This will just get sprayed with varnish or I'll oil it after with brushes, like carefully. This is kind of actually a cool little, this is a moment where joinery came in, the structure and the joint really play into themselves to create mass. This client wanted the start of this idea actually started with this leg. The client wanted thick legs, and the stock that we had was 4/4. So we had to beef it up, and we had to find a way to make it look thicker. What is that? And so we made the whole system so it was a 8-legged table. And then, these guys came in, there was another leg here to create mass, because we were like, oh, we want to use that wood for this, because it's gonna be perfect for this piece, but we need more mass under this thing as a big dining room table. So we glued up 4/4 stock in this kind of section. So it's 8, each leg was actually 2 legs. And that was kind of fun to play with the joinery aspect of that. And then, you get this thick leg or mass down there that feels strong, but you can see through it, it lightens it up. It doesn't feel like this, 4-inch
Kind of model it, something. So it's crafty, but it's got one of our clients always used the word, I wanted to have gravitas.
Yeah, it's got gravitas.
But then we
Doesn't
made
feel
something
too
that,
much.
so our eye was like, this is kind of heavy.
Yeah.
And it was heavy, like he didn't want it. And then we found out, I think we're we had two different understandings of the word
Yeah,
gravitas. but-
Gravitas, we were like, is it drawing you in? That's what we
Yeah.
feel. Oh, like gravitas is something that's drawing you in. That's what I get, you know. But for him, it was like
You don't have
gravitas
to
meant like,
get all the way back.
be-
there.
I could know.
It's simple.
but yeah. It's
funny-
funny. That's a fun aspect of like the whole
The joints, like, there's no sitting there.
Is you
Like,
learn how
we
to
have saw, we have a saw for set our shop that we got the glue
explain things. certain
like,
moments, and you
7 years ago.
you actually.
And it's a sawhorse. Things
You're
are racking on it all the time.
business,
It's got no glue.
not
It's stitched together. It's like,
and a lot of times
you know,
we'll just require to walk through. some
good, a
stuff.
well-fitting joint. I mean,
Like
obviously,
somebody
but
who's like,
it always amazes me.
who's like very particular and strong,
Strong.
will be like, can we come by and like look at the space so we know where it's going? And then it gives us a good feel of what they are looking for, because you'll walk through the house and you're like, okay, everything in here is like, you know, really American traditional furniture and ink, you know, and you're like, okay, cool, I can kind of play with all this and do this. Or everything in here is really heavy and, you know, arts and crafts.
Yeah.
And that guy actually in particular is really funny. We walked into his house and we're like, all right, cool, we got this. We know exactly what do you want scale wise, because he had all these beautiful, elegant little tables everywhere. And all of his furniture was really like, you know, light, airy. And it turned out he had inherited all his furniture from his parents, and he was sentimental to him, but he like didn't really care for it. He was just like, oh, I love it. It's beautiful. But and so we built like these two really lovely little like bedside tables. And he was like, I kind of wanted bigger. Then we went up into his like next story in his house, and it was like everything in there he had purchased himself, and it was like Alan Peters pieces and all this stuff, and it was all big, you know, massive parts, and you're like gravitas. All right, cool. Everything is being scaled way up for you. Yeah. But yeah, so that's kind of like, I mean, like we could go all night about this stuff. This is like, you know, if this is only a, you know, a toe in the pond on this stuff. It's like you can run with this. This is like just a starting point to think about joinery. Is like we really want to translate like practical and beautiful is kind of like the name of the game in this stuff. Like we used to, you know, there's times that we'll do very square, simple tables. Like we're working on a table right now that's totally just all square parts locked in. You know, it's very mechanical looking. And there's a place for that. But there's a lot of time we like to just layer it up a little bit, you know. But practical stuff is that's what we love the best, is like something that somebody can live with for the rest of their lives. And that joint's always gonna look neat. There's always ways to plan for that, because you see from all the makers over the last hundreds and hundreds of years where things are like, okay, that moved over time and this changed over time. And so you learn where to break edges and where to loosen joints and not worry about seeing a little black line there, you know. So yeah.
There any questions?
Yeah.
I have to ask, do you have a jointer?
Oh, yeah. We're really good with hand tools, but we also aren't like total purists where we shy away.
Oh yeah.
I mean, ultimately, the marriage of both keeps it fun, and you can actually make some money at it too, you know?
Yeah. We have to like, people are like, oh, you guys do handcrafted furniture. 100%. This is handcrafted furniture. Do we use a mortar, sir? 100%. Do we use a table saw to cut tenons? 100%. How can you make it accurate? How can you make a living doing it? I
We don't use a
can't.
CNC,
Never use a CNC.
but only because we haven't made enough capital yet to buy.
We would love if we could hand something to a guy with a CNC and be like, oh,
At the same time,
what's that?
you have to use things at the same time.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, you have to, especially in what we do. Nowadays, the demand for speed too is insane. Like people come to us, they're like, all right, can I get, you know, a dining room table and a sideboard with 8 drawers? And you're like, yeah, totally. That sounds awesome. And they're like, cool, can you do it in like 8 weeks from now? And you're like, can you do it? Like, can you wait 2 years? Because like we have a million things going on. And also that's going to take months to make.
Clients ahead of, you know, whatever.
Yeah, and clients ahead of you, like we always have the list of clients that are, you know, we try to keep ourselves booked up for at least a year. I mean, it would be really nice to be booked for 2,
Like
but
the convenience of Amazon has made, it seems like it's made all of us.
and wait.
Maybe they can't have it in 2
Yeah.
days.
Oh, I had 2 dining room tables come in earlier this year. Remember the Afro and a Magnolia dining room table, and they both won them in 6 weeks.
Mhm.
And one of them was 8 feet by 4 feet and 42 tall, and the other one was 60 was it, how wide was? I think it was 58 round.
58 round.
Yeah, 58 round, and it was like complicated wood, complicated joinery. It was
I
just
mean,
like-
making that request for that table is one thing, but making that time request for the drawing that they selected is
oh
like,
yeah, yeah.
I mean, if that's now,
That's a whole nother
if
thing.
that's the limitation, it's time that we gotta erase a lot of details that you feel very
Yeah.
attached to.
Yeah, yeah, that's another thing, is like making it very clear to clients that you're like, the time, like your lead time starts the day you say 100%, this is the piece, go. Because a lot of time they're like, all right, cool, we're gonna start the process today, can we get it in 6 weeks, and you're like, yeah, you can get it in 6 weeks. And then they go, all right, cool. All right, let's go back and forth for 2.5 weeks about which piece I want and how to change it, make it this, can we have a whole meeting, and at the end of it, like, all right, cool. So it's still, you'll have it ready in like 4 weeks, and you're like, whoa.
Clock started ticking.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like, as soon as they got the approval, yeah, we can get it in 6 weeks. Yeah, it's a funny thing. I've been working with a buddy of mine who has a metal shop, and we've been going back and forth about small business work and communications and marketing and all this stuff and design and he was talking about that. He's like, I work with these interior designers that design these insane metal things, and then I have to make it very clear to them that until I get a deposit and a 100% approval, there's this time frame is just getting pushed out, and it's you have to make it clear to them, like off the deck, that that's the deal. And it's really hard to, but you gotta just do it. It's like, ugh.
You guys price it by the amount of hours you anticipate putting in the piece?
Yeah, I mean, it's
Material.
pretty much time, material, shop overhead.
Yeah.
For the most part, yeah.
You feel you're so accurate, you'll always hit it by you lose money sometimes.
Oh, well, I mean, we only lost money for like the first 5 years.
I thought it was the first 12.
Basically. Now, we try to give a range. We try to let them know, or maybe one way we'll go about it, because this is a nice way to do it. Here's a number that we will not exceed. Because that way you kind of, you see a price and we all feel like that's the price in our head. And it's kind of nice when somebody's like, oh, 8,000 or whatever, that you come in, you're like, actually, the 7.2, whatever. It's a good feeling, and it sets a cap.
It gives you a limitation to your design too. Like you know that like I can't make like something that's crazy elaborate on this. I can't go crazy ham on this. I have to like tailor it back a little bit, or I can just do whatever because this person's budget is whatever. There are times like we 99% of the time I would say we come either just under budget or on the mark, even if it hurts a little bit, even if we're like, ooh,
And that's like,
love to make an extra like $1,000 on this, but this is good. Like I feel totally fine about this. They're really happy. We're gonna get a good recommendation. Like they came in early. Another thing too is our lead times. Like we'll give really far lead times just to keep it safe, so we don't feel like because things always pop up. There's times where like, oh, we got no work coming in right now. So like by the time we'll finish the design discussion, it'll be no problem. We'll get this thing to you in X amount of time. But then that like over those 4 weeks of design back and forth and conversations, somebody's gonna come in with something, and you're gonna, okay, cool. And then all of a sudden, like usually when that happens, like the deluge starts. It's just this constant, like so we try to set it so like, all right, you can get this by middle of spring. Yeah, if you commission something right now, aim for spring to summer. And then usually we'll come in a little bit early and a little bit under budget, and it's good. I mean, it's good for us. It feels good for us to also be able to like nail a budget or come just a little bit under.
Yeah.
We're doing something nice for them. They were expecting more, so they feel better about it. And then also, if we can get in there early, that's the best. I mean, who doesn't like when something's like,
we try to under promise, over deliver as best we can.
yeah, it's
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.